Welcome back to Flashback Daily. Today we're taking a slightly unique approach for this explainer. Instead of tracking just one historical event from start to finish, we're going to look at the incredible, almost gravitational pull of a single, seemingly arbitrary calendar date. We're exploring how one specific day on the calendar has literally acted as a magnet for world-altering historical events throughout the centuries.
Okay, let's dive into this because honestly, the question of what an Elizabethan battle, a massive New York City blackout, and David Bowie all have in common sounds like the setup to a really strange joke, right? How on earth could a fierce battle all the way back in 1558, a night of total urban chaos in the 1970s, and a legendary performance by a global rock star possibly be connected? Well, the answer is simple, but absolutely fascinating. They all happened on exactly the same day of the year, July 13th.
So here's our itinerary for today's explainer. We'll start with forging nations and borders, then move on to chaos in the Big Apple. After that, we'll examine the Watergate tapes bombshell, look at how Live Aid unites the world, and finally wrap up with the power of one day. Just to anchor ourselves before we break these down by theme, we are going to be jumping across a massive span of time here, from the Battle of Gravelines in 1558 to the Northwest Ordinance in 1787, the 1863 New York City draft riots, the Watergate tapes in 1973, the 1977 New York City blackout, all the way up to Live Aid in 1985. It's a huge timeline, but that one date is our constant guide. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Forging Nations and Borders, Battles and Pacts. We're starting way back in France on July 13th, 1558. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the conflict at the Battle of Gravelines. The Anglo-Spanish forces were actually pretty heavily outnumbered here. They had about 12,000 infantry and around 2,000 cavalry, going up against French forces boasting 15,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry. But despite those odds, the Anglo-Spanish forces secured a really decisive victory, a win that profoundly shaped European power dynamics, and quite literally the borders of the time. But July 13th isn't just about military battles. It's also a date of immense diplomatic consequence. Fast forward a bit to the 20th century. On July 13th, 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union signed a totally critical mutual aid pact. This was the agreement that provided the means to send vital war material to the Soviets during World War II. Then, exactly 13 years later, on July 13th, 1954, a massive Geneva Accord was reached. This one fundamentally altered Southeast Asia by dividing Vietnam into North and South, right along the 17th parallel.
Next up, we shift our focus from international borders to the concrete canyons of New York City for Section 2, Chaos in the Big Apple, a city pushed to the brink. It's incredibly compelling that July 13th just happens to mark two of the most intense moments of urban pressure in New York City's history, and they're separated by over a century. Back on July 13th, 1863, we saw the start of the devastating New York City draft riots right in the middle of the Civil War. Then, jump to July 13th, 1977, and the entire city was plunged into darkness during a massive, chaotic blackout. Both of these events really tested the very fabric of the city. Now, focusing in on 1977, it's wild to see exactly how the infrastructure failed. So the crucial point is that soaring summer temperatures put just an immense amount of stress on the U.S. power grids, which ultimately triggered the massive system failure. It's a stark, real-world reminder of how vulnerable our modern urban infrastructure can be when it's pushed to the absolute brink by something as simple as a severe heat wave. Moving along, we pivot from the literal darkness in New York to political darkness in Washington, D.C. for Section 3, the Watergate tapes bombshell, political shockwaves. So on July 13th, 1973, the Watergate scandal was absolutely blown wide open. And the catalyst for all of this was a man named Alexander Butterfield. He was the White House aide who revealed to Senate investigators that President Richard Nixon had actually bugged the Oval Office and the Cabinet Room to routinely record his own conversations. This one piece of incredibly consequential testimony, inadvertently but permanently, hastened the president's resignation. Now, what's really interesting about this number is the sheer weight it carries. 18.5. See, the revelation of that taping system sparked a fierce legal battle to get a hold of the recordings. And when they were finally handed over, there was an infamous 18.5-minute gap on one of the most crucial tapes. That chunk of missing audio quickly became one of the most hotly debated mysteries in all of American political history. The chain of events set in motion on that particular July 13th completely altered the American political landscape. It really reaffirmed a fundamental truth, which PBS News beautifully summarized when discussing the scandal, stating, "A free press is a cornerstone of a healthy democracy." The level of transparency demanded during Watergate forever changed how the public interacts with and scrutinizes the highest levels of government. Let's shift gears now to an incredibly high note of global harmony. Welcome to Section 4, Live Aid Unites the World, the Global Jukebox. On July 13, 1985, the whole world tuned in for a completely unprecedented event. Billed as 17 hours of rock music for Africa, Live Aid was this massive dual-venue benefit concert simulcast globally. It was taking place simultaneously at Wembley Stadium in London and JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. The sheer logistical scale and ambition of pulling off a broadcast like this back in the 80s was just absolutely staggering. To really grasp the impact, you just have to think about a fraction of the legendary performers who took the stage that day. You had U2 giving a totally star-making performance, Dire Straits joined by Sting, the iconic David Bowie, Paul Young, and, of course, a band that delivered what many people still consider to be the greatest live set in rock history. Let's move to the set list and see how this builds, because Queen delivered an absolute masterclass in stadium rock. They kicked things off with the ballad segment of Bohemian Rhapsody, rolled right into the massive crowd-clapping energy of Radio Gaga, kept the momentum soaring with Hammer to Fall and Crazy Little Thing Called Love, before delivering the ultimate knockout punch. We Will Rock You flowing seamlessly right into We Are the Champions. It was 20 minutes of pure musical perfection, forever etched into the legacy of July 13th. And hey, speaking of music history, I've got a fantastic, surprising flashback for you. Decades before Live Aid rocked the globe, July 13th was already a massive milestone date in music. Why? Because on July 13th, 1939, a very young Frank Sinatra stepped into a studio with the Harry James Band and recorded his very first song, From the Bottom of My Heart. Pretty cool, right? That brings us to our final section today, the power of one day, history in the making. Let's quickly summarize the incredible journey we've taken today and look at the echoes of July 13th. We didn't even mention earlier that way back in 1099, the Crusaders launched their final assault on Jerusalem on this exact day. We've seen border-defining battles in 1558, moments of sheer urban chaos testing New York City in both the 19th and 20th centuries, a major turning point for government transparency in 1973, and unprecedented global unity through music in 1985. Understanding all this really matters because it shows us that history isn't just a dry list of random dates. It's a rich tapestry, and sometimes those threads weave together on the exact same day across millennia. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought. History is continuous, you know? It's happening right now all around us. Based on the incredible repeated echoes of this one specific date, what history-making event might happen on your next July 13th? Will it be a moment of chaos, a huge political bombshell, or maybe a moment that unites the globe? Keep your eyes open. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.